18th to you, and welcome to our May 18, 2024 County Board meeting. I'm Board Chair Libby Garvey with my colleagues, Vice Chair Takis Karantonis, members Matt DeFerranti, Susan Cunningham, and Maureen Coffey. Thank you all for joining us here in the County Boardroom, and I know some folks are joining us remotely through Microsoft Teams, and also some of our staff members may also be joining us remotely in our hybrid meeting model. Masks are optional today, but you're very welcome to wear one if you'd like one and don't have it. They are available from the clerk on the dais here or in the atrium from our assistant who's out there. A couple of announcements before we get going. For in-person speakers, if you haven't been here, that podium goes up and down because people are different sizes. There's buttons on the right with an arrow, and you can push that to make it go up. It looks like it's down pretty low right now. Please speak clearly into the microphone when you speak. If you've got documents that you would like us to look at, you can give them to our clerk here, and we will take a look at them for sure. Put your name and contact information on them if you might. If you are joining us remotely, please keep your microphones muted and your cameras off until you're called on to speak. And those who are remote, if you're just on phone, you may have to use *6 if you're on the phone. Or, of course, there's a microphone button on the toolbar if you're using Teams, and you can click on that to make sure you're unmuted. A Spanish language interpreter is available for the public comment, I believe. Is our interpreter here? Yes. Could you please introduce yourselves in English and Spanish?
Hi, my name is Maria. I'm the Spanish interpreter. If anyone needs interpreting, please let me know. Mi nombre es María, yo soy la intérprete. Si alguien necesita un intérprete por ahora, sabe.
Gracias. Thank you. And just so you know, for those of you who are going to stay for a while, sometimes we have to stretch our legs and we get up and move around because we're here for a pretty long time. Please be assured that there's microphones and camera back there, so you might not see us, but we can see and hear you. And I also want to just remind folks, I know we have a number of people here, which is great. This is a time, our public comment is a time to alert the board to issues that have not been the subject of a recent public hearing and are not on the agenda. To ensure that we can hear from a wide range of topics and to be fair and consistent, we do have a one speaker per topic rule. And that helps us kind of efficiently manage things so that we can get through the main purpose of today's meeting, which is to consider items. So it's also to respect the time of others who are here and also want to speak. We appreciate everybody's help adhering to these procedures. If you're here with a coordinated group, and it looks to me very much like a lot of people are, that's great. And we'll just ask you to identify one representative to speak for you. But if you want to make us aware that you're all in favor, please, this is a great way, silent, to show that you are supportive, and that can help us keep the meeting moving and allow others to speak as well. And then for those of you who'd really like some more dialogue with us, public comment can be maybe not as satisfying. You speak, we do respond a little bit at the end of all of the public comment. We do make some response, but not a lot. If you'd really like a dynamic conversation with the board, you can do Open Door Monday and sign up for that, which is online. There's more information on the website, or you can see either a person in the back or our clerk here, and if you'd like to talk to us another way and have a little bit of a conversation. And I think with that, we are ready to move to public comment. And Mr. Kirshner, would you please call the first two public comment speakers?
Of course. One moment, please. All right. Our first public comment speaker is Dima Hakura, followed by Daniel Gajewski.
Thank you. Ms. Hakura.
Good morning. If you don't pass a ceasefire resolution, you're picking a side. By saying it's too complex, you justify the killing of over 35,000 people, mostly women and children, and the decimating of 2.3 million lives. By saying it's an international issue outside of your purview, you lay lie to the past proclamations of this board, and by staying silent, you're condoning. I was the only Palestinian from Gaza to speak before the Arlington's Human Rights Commission, where I shared stories of brutal killings of relatives and loved ones. Are there no other Arlingtonian Palestinians? No, it's because they have a real fear of being targeted, doxxed, blackballed, and fired. Palestinians, Arabs, and all those who support them are intimidated and scared. We see the anti-Palestinian hate, the anti-Arab hate, and the Islamophobia that plagues our country in addition to historic discrimination. We see the lack of care and respect for our kin and blood in the horror show that that our nation is funding in Gaza. We hear the warmongering and the bias in the mainstream media and the suppressing of speech on college campuses. We observe how most politicians are being silenced and how some are weaponizing it for their agendas. Does this affect our lives in Arlington? Of course. We are experiencing our own dehumanization and demonization on top of the trauma from the killing, terror, dispossession, dislocation, and starvation of our people, not only in Gaza, but in the West Bank and Israel. It's not an international issue. It is local as you can get. Your residents need the solidarity and support of their local government. We need to know that Arlington values our and our kin's lives and humanity, and that our county is willing to call for a permanent and unconditional ceasefire, and to call for the complete cessation of arms shipments, and the release of all hostages, including all the innocent people and children incarcerated under military detention in Israeli jails with no charges. Now is the time to dig deep for the moral courage to pass a ceasefire resolution. It's not hard to do what is right. Ceasefire now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hakura. Our next speaker is Daniel Gajewski, followed by Maria Parada.
I'm here to speak on a topic which is largely faded from public consciousness, the threat the ongoing COVID pandemic poses to disabled people and what the county can do about it. While transmission may seem low at present, it is important to note that COVID has repeatedly mutated in ways that have allowed it to evade vaccine immunity and remain highly transmissible. As far as I know, I'm not immunocompromised. However, I'm autistic, and autistic people as a group are significantly more likely than neurotypicals to suffer severe long-term effects as a result of COVID. Moreover, the way the community treats its other disabled members has implications for the support I can expect to receive when I need it. And right now, those implications are grim. I have heard many disabled people express how abandoned and betrayed they feel by our institutions, which have chosen to disregard the threat COVID continues to present to them for the sake of moving on from the pandemic. They have also expressed alarm at the mainstreaming of previously fringe eugenicist views, such as that taking steps to protect the disabled during a pandemic should be considered a matter of personal choice, or that repeated exposure to a potentially deadly pathogen is somehow beneficial to one's immune system. The mainstreaming of these views occurs at a time when many governments are choosing to expand eligibility for their assisted dying programs in lieu of providing sufficient social support for the disabled. Moreover, as disability justice advocate Imani Barbaran has pointed out, many Palestinian refugees arriving here are going to be highly vulnerable to COVID as a result of the bombing and famine they are being subjected to. Like a ceasefire resolution, steps to protect those at high risk, such as masking in public, are also steps to prevent the furthering the genocide of Palestinians. As such, I am calling on the board to do whatever it can to make Arlington more accessible to those at high risk, such as requiring those able to wear masks and providing free respirators at county events, and installing HEPA filters in county facilities to ensure a steady flow of clean air. And again, ceasefire now.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Maria Parada, followed by Peter Evans. Ms. Parada? All right, moving along, Mr. Peter Evans.
Good morning. I am Peter Evans. I live here in Arlington, and I thank you for these 2 minutes to talk with you about how we promote a culture of gun safety here in Arlington. The United States and our Commonwealth accept the Second Amendment and widespread private ownership of firearms. While our country has a serious crisis of gun violence, we're more fortunate here in Arlington that our gun trouble is relatively small, but it is still growing, as you can see from the statistics that the police department has provided me and I've tried to distribute to you. You might notice that the number of guns that the police department confiscated in the last year and the number turned in voluntarily have both increased. Also notice that ACPD is seeing an increase in the number of untraceable, privately made ghost guns. We seem to have a very responsive law enforcement and a local gun store that works with ATF and Virginia State Police to apprehend many of the people who try to make illegal gun purchases here. I hope you saw the May 10th article in the Washington News 4 NBC article about how many purchasers in the first quarter of this year were arrested while they were still in the store waiting for their background check to clear. That's pretty responsive. Arlington Public School District has posted an informative website about secure storage, and they've committed to reaching out every year to all of their families about the options and benefits of secure storage. In addition, the police department has a very helpful website promoting gun safety, and they are set to conduct Arlington's first gun buyback event on June 8th, thanks to your recent ordinance. Meanwhile, Arlington Moms Demand Action volunteer are inviting everyone to wear orange. Oops.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Your time has elapsed.
Thank you for my 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Next speaker is, pardon me, our next speaker is Sandra Fortson, followed by Sam Levinson.
Good morning. As an Army JAG and a retired Army JAG and Lieutenant Colonel, I understand the need for all facts on both sides of an issue to be considered. That did not occur at your March meeting when you approved the condemnation and the taking of the property at 1802 Columbia Pike, owned by my cousin Karen Newman. As Karen's guardian and conservator, I am here to oppose the proposed taking of her property. Arlington View and many of Karen's neighbors also oppose the taking of the property. I urge reversal of your approval based on the following facts not discussed or considered at your March meeting. The property has been in the family since 1900, so sentimental value and generational wealth, not cash, is most important to the family. The home is structurally sound and does not need to be condemned. It is currently being renovated with costs of more than $70,000 thus far. Mostly deep cleaning and cosmetic and upgraded to repairs. County attorneys were aware of my renovations and renovation intentions. The family's desires or intentions to move Karen from the nursing home to her own home to reside with a family member was not discussed. There was no discussion about alternative plans, one being the county's initial approved contracted plan to approve the safety issues with an easement for which I agreed to enter negotiations. Ms. Garvey, you discussed systemic racism at the March meeting, but approved the taking of the property of one of the few African-American families in the neighborhood, thereby adversely impacting the family's generational wealth. Attorney Michael Coughlin of Walsh Colucci Law Firm will be filing a lawsuit
Thank you, Ms. Fortson. Your time has elapsed.
challenging the taking of,
Thank you, Ms. Fortson. Your time has elapsed.
as I intend to continue to fight this
Thank
matter.
you, Ms. Fortson. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Sam Levison, followed by William Walls. Hi there, Mr. Murray.
Hey.
We'll call you in turn.
Good morning. This is Sam virtually. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. So good morning. I'm here to make the suggestion that multiple speakers be allowed to speak on any given topic for public comment, or at least up to a certain limit, like three to four, rather than just one. And I'd like to offer two main reasons for this. So first of all, while we'll never know exactly how many Arlington residents are for versus against a certain issue, the larger the sample size, the likelier it is to accurately represent the whole population for, in any one particular setting. And there was a good episode I watched by John Oliver a while back on global warming, where he brought in 97 scientists who believe it's real and 3 who believe it's a hoax, which, more accurately represents the general population than just one scientist on either side. And number 2, the argument of what constitutes one topic is vague and can be up to different interpretations. For example, last month, someone was cut off from talking about the Nakba based on what I presume to be the argument that a ceasefire and a Nakba acknowledgement both fall under the quote-unquote topic of Palestine. But to most of us, that feels like quite a stretch. I see it kind of like saying, like, if someone talks about funding better healthcare, and someone else talks about funding housing, those saying that those both fall under the topic of county budget suggestions. With that being said, I do appreciate that the board has Open Door Mondays. That is a good opportunity to get comments across. I understand that we're also all people. We can't realistically listen to an endless stream of public comments. But it's really important that the general public of Arlington also be able to hear these public comments. And I really urge the board to at least permit a maximum number of speakers on a certain topic above just one per topic. So like at least 3 to 5. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is William Walls, followed by Andrew Shawn.
Good morning, Chair Garvey, and board members. I recommend that the board read Richard Haas's book, The Bill of Obligations, The 10 Habits of Good Citizens. This book emphasizes that we are a representative democracy where elected officials are meant to represent everyone, not just a select few. Haas wrote this book between 2020 and 2023, reflecting the threats to democracy posed by radical extremists and special interests over the past several years. Examples include the gun lobby and the voting rights movement. The book describes requirements or laws, and more importantly, obligations or moral compass. The first third of the book discusses the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and additional 17 amendments. These are the requirements or laws. Obligations, on the other hand, involve what citizens and legislators should do rather than what they must do. Haas defines these obligations as moral and political commitments to be undertaken voluntarily. These are intended to be more significant than responsibilities, which are often easily ignored. The book emphasizes that the strength and endurance of American democracy depends on these obligations being put into practice. Going back to the requirements, Haas explains that the founders had to balance the diverse interests of various states and individuals, necessitating civility and compromise between small and large states, states with different views on equal rights, slavery, and other. The key theme he stresses is compromise. Considering this, I asked the board to consider the diverse perspectives on the Middle East conflict. Despite receiving input from the JCRC of Greater Washington and others suggesting that the board should not be involved, it is crucial to find a compromise in this issue. You are supposed to represent all the citizens of Arlington, not just special interests. Where is the board's compromise on this issue?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Walls.
Thank you, Mr. Walls. Our next speaker is Andrew Shawn, followed by Luz Tobar.
Buenos días, miembros del Consejo. Soy un voluntario que apoya los derechos de los inquilinos en Norte Virginia y quiero hablar de los desalojos. Cada mes, cientos de desalojos están archivados en Arlington. Es claro que este es un problema donde la renta sigue aumentando, pero hay veces cuando no hay una noticia formal, a veces se aumenta la renta tan alta que se sabe que un inquilino no puede pagar, o otras veces no ofrecen contrato nuevo. Este todavía es un desalojo. Y hay otros tipos de desalojos. Por ejemplo, como dice en el sitio de Arlington que describe el proceso de los desalojos, la ley no requiere que el propietario le explique por qué quiere desalojarle, a menos que la razón es la renta que no es pagado. Muchos inquilinos en Arlington sospechan que el propietario sabe que son inmigrantes, si documentado, si tiene visa, y los propietarios están apostando que los inmigrantes no saben sus derechos.
Could you pause just a second for the translator, and we'll pause your time if the clerk could hold your time, and the translator can translate for you.
Good morning, board members. I am a volunteer tenants' rights activist in Northern Virginia, and I would like to discuss evictions. Every month, hundreds of evictions.
Yeah, you have to be louder if you
Can
would.
I say it?
You would like to translate yourself.
Is that okay?
That's a really good question.
She's reading from my.
She is. All right, that's fine.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
but
You can
won't
let him. Yes, that's fine. You can do it in English and Spanish. Go ahead. That's okay. I think, Madam Translator, I think we'll let him go ahead and do it. But I'm going to watch you. You've got a minute, okay?
All right, thank you.
All right?
You want me to do it?
I can do it.
Okay.
Thank you.
A minute in Spanish and a minute in English. Yeah.
Mr. Shawn, we'll restart your time.
All right, thank you. I said, good morning, board members. I'm a volunteer tenants' rights activist in Northern Virginia and I'd like to discuss evictions. Every month, hundreds of evictions are filed in Arlington. Clearly, this is a problem where rents continue to rise, but sometimes there isn't always a formal eviction notice. Sometimes landlords raise the rent so high that they know a tenant can't pay, or sometimes they choose not to renew the lease. This is still an eviction, and there are other types of evictions. In fact, as stated on Arlington's website describing the eviction process, the law does not require the landlord to tell you why they want to evict you, unless the reason is unpaid rent. Many tenants los propietarios tienen muchas ventajas que un inquilino no tiene en corte. Como el sitio de Arlington admite, no tiene que tener un abogado, pero el propietario tendrá un abogado en corte. Y el miedo de la deportación en adición al desalojo es especialmente espantoso. Al levantarse por los derechos de los inquilinos, el Consejo de Arlington debe resuelva a apoyar a los casi 2 millones de personas desalojadas con bombas y armas en Gaza. El pueblo palestino ha estado desalojado de lugar a lugar por más que 76 años. Exclamamos de la tierra, entre del río al mar, Arlington y cada parte del mundo, alto fuego ahora. And then in English.
In English, go ahead.
The last part that I said was landlords have many advantages that a tenant doesn't have in an eviction court. As Arlington websites admits, you are not required to have an attorney, but the landlord will have an attorney in court. And the fear of deportation, in addition to eviction, is especially frightening. In standing up for tenants' rights, Arlington County should resolve to support the almost 2 million evicted with bombs and guns in Gaza. The Palestinian people have been evicted from place to place for more than 76 years.
Thank you.
It is time that the board joins the growing chorus of voices that extend from the land between the river to the sea to Arlington County.
Thank you,
Thank
to
you.
every other
Mr.
part of the world that says ceasefire
Gracias.
now.
Thank you, Mr. Schoen. Our next speaker is Luz Tobar, followed by Keith Oberg. Ms. Tobar.
Today, we are delivering our sign-on statement with over 30 organizations on behalf of ICE out of Arlington coalitions. Our demands have been clear. No voluntary collaboration with ICE, this violent agency that keeps harming our community. No federal law requires Arlington County to keep this voluntary partnership with ICE. By keeping this partnership, you are complicit to the harm of ICE against our community, including violence, ICE incarceration, surveillance, and deportation. This revision of the so-called trust policy should reflect actual safety for all Arlington residents by removing Section 7 from the trust policy, ending all voluntary collaboration with ICE, and adding the provision of accepting different ranges of IDs to the county's trust policy. By taking these actions, you will be taking steps to protect the migrant community of Arlington and showing with actions that you support us. We have not yet received the draft revisions of the county's trust policy. We want to make sure that there is enough time for feedback to include impacted community members in the process and that it doesn't further discriminate and target the community. We urge you to take the strongest stand and end all voluntary collaboration with ICE and also in support of Palestine for a ceasefire. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tobar. Our next speaker is Keith Oberg, followed by Donald Murray.
I speak today on behalf of Bikes for the World, a local nonprofit that grew out of an initial sponsorship by Arlingtonians for a clean environment, now Eco Action, with a used bicycle collection in 1995. On a Saturday morning, residents donated 143 bicycles. It has not slowed since. Bikes for the World has now collected some 200,000 serviceable bicycles in the Mid-Atlantic region, over 10,000 from Arlington, and donated them locally and in 20 countries around the globe. In 1999, I and another parent led a weekend community event at our children's middle school, Gunston Goes Green, and we recruited a range of public and private environmentally minded entities, including Eco Action, Potomac Overlook Park, the Arlington Fire Department, and the Solid Waste Department, a first step toward establishing a template for what became eCare, the county-sponsored environmental collection and recycling event. In future years, the county took the lead, allocating space to multiple organizations. Our focus was to collect resident donations of bike-related items, and it continued without interruption until the pandemic. It resumed afterwards in fits and starts, but ceased entirely following the spring 2022 eCare. The decision to exclude Bikes for the World was taken unilaterally by county staff with no previous discussion and, in our view, unsubstantiated. We believe this is a loss to the county and to the world in multiple ways, in reducing waste, in saving the county money, and in encouraging citizen involvement. In the last full year of participation in eCare, Bikes for the World netted some 300 bikes at the 2 eCare events, plus many parts, tools, and accessories, which in many instances would have become scrap metal. We urge the county to renew and formalize its 2-decade, no-cost, volunteer-based partnership with Bikes for the World and include this group in eCare once more. There's more than enough room
Thank you, Mr.
at the
Oberg.
late fees.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr. Oberg. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Donald Murray, followed by Beatriz Mejia.
Hello, my name is Donald Murray. I worked for 43 years at the National Association of Counties as their senior lobbyist. I'm very pleased to be here. I met Supervisor DeFrancini when he started out his political career, and he wondered why the only person who voted for him or who intended to vote for him was on the county board was working for all the counties in the country. And the thing that impressed me so much about Supervisor DeFrancini was his work on home rule. Home rule, as many of you know, is where counties are able to provide services that are good government in nature, where a county supervisor can ask for the freedom to move ahead on issues where the state has not given the counties the authorization to do something. You know, a county is bound by principles of home rule. They need enabling legislation in order to get anything passed. And unfortunately, in many counties, that authorization is never provided. The state runs the show. And Arlington County, however, has a reputation of being a good government county. You have a very high education level. Some of the top people in the federal government live in Arlington County, like the Speaker of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Your time is up. Thank you for coming.
Well, I just wanted to say that...
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Your time has elapsed.
Madam Chair, that I was mistakenly put out of my house. I lived at 4731 South 29th Street, very middle-class neighborhood.
Thank you.
And I've lived there for 43 years.
Mr. Murray, thank you. We have someone here who can talk to you and perhaps help you. But
I'd like to talk to you and Mr. and Supervisor DeFrancini
Thank you.
Mr. Murray.
about what this board could do.
Yes, thank you.
To strengthen home rule in
Thank you.
county government.
Thank you. That would be great. This is our time. We have 2 minutes, and we can talk later at Open Door Monday, and we do have someone in room 311 who could help you if you would like to meet with that person, Mr. Connolly. And that is out in the lobby if you would like to do that, and then come to an Open Door Monday for more of a conversation. Thank you. Next speaker.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Beatriz Mejia, followed by Danny Sendejas.
Estoy aquí en nombre de la coalición Liberen a Todos Virginia para hablar sobre el centro de detención en Farmville, en Virginia. La detención de Farmville tiene historial de abuso, brutalidad y negligencia que está gestionado por empresas penitenciarias privadas abusivas. 2 personas han muerto en el centro de detención por negligencia médica e innumerables otras han sufrido abusos físicos, emocionales y psicológicos.
Thank you.
Conozco
Thank you. Are you
personalmente
going,
a
excuse me,
personas.
ma'am, are you going to speak in English as well? Or can she translate? Thank you.
I am here in the name of the coalition of Free Them All in Virginia to talk about the detention center, Farmville, here in Virginia. The Farmville Detention Center has a history of abuse, brutality, and negligence. It is funded by a penitentiary private abusive penitentiary. 2 people have died in the detention center for medical negligence. In various other time frames, the detention center these people have suffered physical abuse, emotional and psychological.
Thank you.
Conozco personas que han salido de ese lugar con ansiedad, estrés, las cargas mentales que destruyen a las personas y sus familias, como la mía, por ejemplo, en el que un padre y esposo permaneció detenido. Es bien difícil responder a un niño cuándo va a llegar papá o por qué no está acá. Y que son palabras que todavía desarman y después de eso nada ha vuelto a ser igual.
Okay, en inglés.
I know personally people who have left the facility with anxiety, stress, and a lot of emotional baggage. It destroys family and it destroys people and their family, just like mine. And where husband and father was detained and not being able to. And then I could not, respond to my own child, like, where is my father? These are words that really destroy my heart.
Se preguntarán por qué o qué tiene que ver este centro de detención con Arlington. Pues los miembros de la comunidad de Arlington acaban detenidos en este centro de detención debido a las políticas locales en que la policía colabora con migración y la cual han ido a sacar a miembros de la comunidad de sus casas.
And you might ask yourself, how is this detention center associated with Arlington? Well, so the migrant community in Arlington are taken to Farmville, to the detention Farmville, due to local policies and also the collaboration of immigration or ICE. And a lot of time, ICE goes to these homes and removes them from the Arlington County.
Si no hacen todo lo que esté en sus manos para poner fin a la colaboración voluntaria con ICE y la policía, serán cómplices de estos abusos de esta prisión privada. Insto a que en nombre de nuestra coalición liberen a todos y miembros de la comunidad en Virginia que hemos sido directamente impactados, se garantice la seguridad de nuestras comunidades inmigrantes lejos de ese centro de detención, abuso y de abuso mortal.
If you don't do everything that you have in your power, in order to have a voluntary, to cease the voluntary collaboration with ICE, you guys will be an accomplice to the abuse in this private prison. On behalf of the coalition of Free Them All here in Virginia, and from the members of this community, we that have been completely affected. We want guaranteed of safety to our immigrant communities. And stay away from this immigration center, this detention center, due to the abuse and death.
Todos podemos hacer algo diferente por nuestras comunidades en Arlington y nuestra comunidad inmigrante que está acá presente también tiene posición y fuerza. También queremos pedir el cese al fuego por Palestina.
We all have the power in order to benefit here our community. We all have right here a position of power, and we have strength. And we are also calling for a ceasefire of Palestine.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mejia. Our last and final speaker is Danny Sendejas.
Before I start, I asked for an accommodation for extra time, if that's all right.
Pardon?
I asked for an accommodation for additional time. So is that going to happen?
English and Espanol.
What's that?
For interpretation?
No.
No, just
For
2
health
minutes.
reasons.
Just
No,
2 minutes.
I have a
Just 2
disability that
minutes.
requires an accommodation. So if you're not going to grant that, please be clear.
What is your accommodation that you need?
I don't have to disclose my medical information in front of people. I brought it up in my form, and I brought it up before I began. So I just want to make sure that
Okay,
it's going to be.
thank you. 2 minutes, 2 minutes.
All right, that's a violation
We're
against my
speaking
dis-
fine.
that's
Everybody
an
can
ADA
understand you.
violation.
2
Just
minutes.
wanna
Go
make
for
that
it.
very,
Go for
very
it. Go
clear.
ahead, Mr.
Very, very
Zayas.
clear.
Start.
All right. Good morning. My name is Danny, and I'm an organizer and member of Forest Not Amazon. I'm here today in solidarity with communities here and abroad who have been fighting for freedom and liberation, fighting for their right to remain in their homes and to keep their loved ones safe and to stay together. I'm here to talk about the role of technology, like tech weapons, that your friends at Amazon create and host. Tech weapons that agencies like police and ICE use to mass scale surveil our people of color, to enact ICE raids, and the ongoing genocide in Gaza and occupation of Palestine. Amazon has been called the backbone of ICE's deportation machine, now having a contract to host HEART, a biometric database of migrants to help track and deport them. Amazon also hosts ShotSpotter, which your county manager has said the county is considering, which is a tech weapon that led to the killing of a 13-year-old boy by Chicago police. And Amazon partners with Google to host Project Nimbus, which is a partnership with the Zionist Israeli government and military to surveil people enforcing apartheid, and AI technology, which has enabled targeted killings, bombings, and mass displacement. So this is a check on you to revisit your relationship to violent corporations like Amazon and the other war profiteers that Arlington hosts. It's ridiculous that you all hosted an event called Arlington 2050, talking about the future of this community at a corporation, at a private site, but it probably makes sense since y'all constantly actively exclude many of our communities from decision-making of their own futures. This is a call to action to prioritize people, communities, and their needs, and to have the courage to take on corporations that are actively harming us. Get ICE out of Arlington, fund our public needs, not police and their tech weapons, and pass a ceasefire resolution now.
Thank you, Mr. Sendejas. All right, is that our final speaker?
That is.
All right, and Maria Parada has not come? Okay, that's fine, thank you. Well, thank you all for coming. Appreciate it on this rainy morning. First, we had Dima Hakura here again. Very nice to see you, Ms. Hakura. And as we've said before, and a number of people have come, I know, understanding that you are supporting certain positions relating to what's happening in Gaza. We recognize this is a really sensitive and complex topic, and it deeply matters to many Arlingtonians in many different ways, and many different Arlingtonians. And board members here have strong personal positions and personal thoughts about it, but we have decided that an official stance is not appropriate and it's not helpful. What's needed right now is more light on this issue, not more heat. And taking positions at this point obviously just involves more heat and does not cast more light on the issue. Foreign policy remains outside of the purview of the county board as local government. However, talking about the responsibility of local government, we do have that, and that is to ensure that our residents, all residents, remain safe from hate speech and related crimes, The national rise of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia fueled by this conflict undoubtedly weighs deeply on our Muslim, Jewish, Israeli, and Palestinian residents, as well as the rest of us. Any report of hate speech or crime in our community deeply concerns this board, and we will meet it with swift response by appropriate departments within the county's government. We ask that all residents, whatever your personal positions may be, please act kindly, thoughtfully, and respectfully to one another as everyone tries to navigate these difficult conversations. And if you see any instances of hate or making people uncomfortable in this community, please report them. And with that, I don't know if my colleagues want to add anything. I think we can go on. All right. Mr. Gajewski was here again talking about COVID and people feeling safe, and we're trying hard to accommodate everybody. We do permit masks here. Obviously, people have masks. You're absolutely welcome to wear them. We provide masks. There are many variety of diseases, not just COVID going around. And actually, I will encourage anybody, whenever you feel sick, no matter what it is, to wear a mask to protect others. Then we had Mr. Evans. Peter Evans was here talking about gun safety. He's been here a lot and been quite effective. We do have a gun buyback program that's about to start, and that is in part because of the advocacy of Mr. Evans, and we appreciate everything that he's been doing on that. Mr. Karantonis was very instrumental in getting that started. I don't know if you want to add anything, Mr. Karantonis, this particular issue. If not, that's okay. On the gun buyback safety, because you did the gun, you did a lot with the gun buyback.
We did a lot on this,
yes.
so we're very happy to see that. What alarms me a lot is the materials that you brought and the confiscations. We have seen also on the legal side of that, so the legal permits that are issued for a concealed carry, a steady increase, and this doesn't break. And this concerns me a lot because this is, potential violence that is embedded in our society and unfortunately supported by our laws. But I applaud the very strong efforts to start talking with our citizens, with our residents in a different way, and including them in a scheme where they can bring back the guns. And I'm looking forward to the June 8th buyback.
Thank you. And that includes Falls Church, I believe, too. Falls Church City is part of that, I think.
Yes.
Which is great. So thank you. All right. That brings me to Sandra Fortson, who came to talk about 1802 Columbia Pike. We appreciate your comments and you coming because there are ongoing negotiations regarding this property at 1802 Columbia Pike. The board cannot comment anymore on that. Mr. Sam Levison came and virtually and wanted to have multiple speakers on a topic. We do have reasons for why we do it, which he acknowledged, and I appreciate that. We do have to have a meeting. We have a meeting coming on. We don't want to spend the whole time, and this is not really a public hearing. It's simply to comment on issues that we want the board to be aware of. We do adopt our rules or how we handle public comment and how we handle all of our meetings at the beginning of every year. So thank you for your thoughts. You may want to come to a Open Door Monday and talk about that. And when the board has its organizational meeting in January, might consider making some changes. Mr. Walls was here to talk about the book Bill of Obligations. And the importance of having different perspectives and allowing different perspectives. I think this board agrees that that's very important. It's part of the reason we have this event at the beginning of every Saturday meeting once a month, and we have translators here, and we're trying very hard to reach everyone and serve everyone. It's also part of the foundation for our equity principles. Andrew Shun was here to talk about evictions. We do have programs with tenant assistance. We do have eviction prevention. I don't know if anyone wants to give more details about the tenant assistance, and if you know of anybody needing help, please let us know, because we work very hard to keep people from being evicted. If you watched our budget, you can see quite a lot of money goes into preventing evictions and supporting people to stay in their homes when they can. We actually started an eviction docket, making sure that when there are evictions are brought to the court, that it's all done at one time to facilitate having people come to assist those that are having issues with eviction. Does anyone want to add anything to that? Yes, Mr. DiFranti.
Well, I think I was second, but I'll just go briefly and then over to Ms. Coffey. But we've had a number of briefings, 2x2 briefings, and we added $450,000 in permanent funding. Based on DHS's presentation, Department of Human Services presentation, I think we provide more in the way of eviction prevention funding than anyone in Northern Virginia, to my knowledge, and perhaps anyone in the region except for DC. You can imagine we have finite resources. We have more than 20,000 people who live on under $50,000 a year for their household income, so we can't help everyone. If your eviction arrears get in the range of $20,000 or $30,000, we can't help everyone, but we do want to help folks and partner as much as possible. And so we'll be having ongoing briefings, because not only is it the morally right thing to do to prevent evictions, it's the fiscally sound thing to do, because if you don't prevent evictions, then folks end up at the hospital and with many other needs. That was more than brevity, but over to you, Ms. Coffey.
That's okay.
Thank you, Madam.
Ms. Coffey.
Thank you. I think what really resonated with me that you said is that not all evictions are about the money. And I've been in the position where my landlord chose to sell the property. I got 45 days notice to find a new apartment here in Arlington, which if you've ever looked for an apartment in Arlington these days is impossible. And I legitimately, I think people think evictions happen to people who don't have means. I'm clearly fine. And I was really worried about where am I actually going to live? And I was talking to friends about, can I crash on your couch? Can I put my stuff in storage? And so really recognizing the soft power that landlords have and the power differential, right? Like, we are not, as tenants, empowered to speak up because there is no process to do that. When a property owner wants you out, they can get you out. And it's really scary. And so this is a part of, now that I'm a few months in and have had a chance to settle, really working on how can we bolster tenants' rights here in Arlington, really trying to we've had some amendments to the Virginia Resident Tenant Landlord Act, and so getting a summary of what's going to change as of July 1. There's some positive stuff. There's a lot of stuff that was vetoed, and then really working to put together some form of substantive resources, right, so that people have somewhere to turn, they have support, and I think really getting that support and education early, getting into buildings, making sure people know, making sure that we can work together, because there is power in numbers. And oftentimes if you are experiencing something in your building, you are not the only person, but it doesn't mean it's any easier to get all together and handle it. So really working to facilitate that, and to remember that not all renters are in our committed affordable units, which does offer some more protections, but most of our renters are fighting for their lives in the free market, and that's a really scary place to be, but I'm there with you. My lease comes up in July, and I'm just crossing my fingers right now.
Thank you. Mr. Karantonis.
Thank you. In addition to what has been said, I mean, it's very clear, we're facing the worst rental market in recent memory. Rents are not only extremely high, higher than ever, they are also increasing at a pace that is higher than ever. This is not, and what concerns me even more is that this is not the only reason why we have a steady demand, an increasing demand for eviction prevention interventions. Mr. Sean has mentioned a specific part, part of evictions that has to do with renters that he's concerned about being discriminated against directly because of their immigration status or others. I mean, we know that evictions typically, quote unquote, discriminate people who don't have the money to pay very high rents. That's very clear. And we are trying to do, as you have heard the most, we never fund it with more money. The eviction prevention programs, the housing assistance programs of all sorts, and the brick and mortar support for affordable housing. The question is, when you see something, please say something. It's extremely important. I recognize the fact that there is a part of the eviction business that happens in silent, where there is not even a moment where they surface. And therefore, I call everybody who knows something, who sees something, to actually say something, and you know where to find us. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, then we had Luz Tobar and Beatriz Mella, and also in part Danny Centellas coming to talk about ICE and our trust policy. And I think I will turn it again to our Vice Chair, Mr. Carantonis, to talk about that. He's been working on that quite a bit. Thank you.
To Mr. Barr's comments, we are working on a reformulation of Section 7. She knows already, and we've reached out, and we are in somewhat constant contact that we're working on that. In the coming couple of months, I very much look forward to have a final check on the issue, the tightening up of Section 7 and a few other things in our trust, a few other improvements, I should say, in our trust policy. I don't believe that it will be as far as the coalition that Mr. Barr is representing will go, but it will go in a fair way to a place where I believe that will create more confidence and less fear with our residents that have an immigration background and are right now afraid of federal enforcement. Still applies that it's federal laws who are here, the important ones, and the immigration policy is a federal policy. Unfortunately, one of the most tortured ones, and one that has been left unresolved for decades now, and that produces all these problems that we are dealing with today. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we had Mr. Oberg. Keith Oberg came to talk about Bikes for the World being excluded, I think, for collecting at our collections, I believe. And Mr. Oberg, I'm not familiar about this issue. I do know you quite well, and we will look into it. If you could, I don't know if you're listening, and we can reach out to him. Yeah, no, absolutely. I was going to add, please, if you could send an email, and actually, if he's not listening, I'll reach out to him. There you are, Mr. Oberg. It's nice to see you, Keith. Hi. Could you send me an email, please, just describing what the situation is, and then we can look into it, all right? Okay, that's great. You're muted, but I saw you said sure, so that would be good. Thank you so very much, and we'll look forward to hearing from you. And then we had Mr. Murray come to talk about home rule and a situation that he had. And again, Mr. Murray, as I was trying to tell you, room 311, right across the lobby, is where Kevin Connolly is there. If you would like some help with a personal situation, you can certainly talk to him, and he will help you with that. And that. So we talked about Beatriz Mella was also here for the trust policy, as was Danny Centellas. I think that is it. Any more comments that colleagues would like to make about? Yes, Mr. DiFranti, I see you working on.
Just briefly, thank you, thanks to Mr. Murray. I do think the most important step is to engage with Mr. Connolly. I will just briefly say that since I talked with you, there is more authority for counties. But in Virginia, there is not, the Dillon rule still applies, and that hurts us on so many issues that have been raised again and again. And at the state level, elections have consequences, and at the federal level, there are breathtaking consequences over the next 6 months. And I'm just mindful of that because we have our job as county board members. We also all have choices to how we spend our next 6 months before November.
Thank you. All right, and with that concludes our public comment. One more thing. Again, thank you, everyone, for coming. For those of you, I did neglect to say in my comments about people concerned about what's happening in the Mideast, please do contact Congressman Beyer, Senator Warner at the federal level. That's where they can make a change. We appreciate you coming out and your advocacy. And stay dry out there. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you would like. But that brings us to our consent agenda. Could I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you. And is there a second? Thank
Ms.
you.
Garvey?
Motion's been moved and seconded. Yes.
We have one item removed.
Excuse me?
There is an item that has been removed from the consent agenda.
Thank you very much. And I forgot to ask you that. And it was item, what number, please?
Item number 13 is
Thank you.
concerning a zoning ordinance amendment number 2024-02, ordinance to amend, reenact, and recodify the zoning ordinance, Articles 7, 14, and 18 with respect to off-site parking.
Thank you very much. So The maker of the motion, I assume that you're fine. We will amend it and have the consent agenda with the item removed. All right, and it's been seconded. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much. All right. For those who are following along with our consent agenda, we've adopted a number of items, and just because something's on the consent agenda doesn't mean that it's not important. It just means that it's not particularly controversial. But there are a number of really interesting and important things that we did with our consent agenda, and I would like to go over those. I think our clerk is ready with a few slides to kind of help me talk through the items. As part of our commercial resiliency efforts, we've adopted a number of zoning ordinance amendments. One of them an amendment this was item 14, that rebrands and amends the provisions for large media screens as outdoor visual entertainment in Arlington's urban regional shopping centers and community centers. It's a new definition, just makes it a little more flexible, and this supports the enhancement and economic viability of Arlington County's large retail establishments. It allows flexibility in the creative use of innovative digital elements and makes it easier to create an attractive environment that encourages gathering and socializing. And so that just sort of adds some flexibility and makes our zoning a little bit more reasonable. We also eliminated taxi cab annual certification fee. There was a $150 per vehicle annual certification fee for taxi cab companies operating in the county. This was done to support the industry, but because it really is continuing to face economic challenges, and just that $150 fee didn't seem to be reasonable anymore. Taxi cabs play a very important role in our transportation system. They support the goals of our master transportation plan. They also provide high-quality services that complement the transit that we provide, which includes the STAR paratransit service and non-motorized travel options. Taxi cab services are accessible to all residents, and they serve the mobility and accessibility needs of individuals regardless of age, income, or ability. I'm pleased we were able to remove that fee. We also adopted an amendment to Chapter 20 of the County Code, and this concerns tax exemptions for various solar energy equipment, facilities, and devices. This aligns our county ordinance with the state law and helps just take down some barriers to folks trying to get some tax exemptions for their solar improvements. We also made improvements to South Carlin Springs Road, Arlington Boulevard, which was upgrading outdated traffic signals, and we improved pedestrian safety and accessibility at the intersections of South Carlin Springs Road and 3rd Road South, and Arlington Boulevard at North-South George Mason Drive. At present, these intersections have traffic signals on span wire, and they lack ADA-compliant ramps and have long pedestrian crossings and narrow sidewalks. This is not so great for pedestrians. The proposed sidewalks, ADA curb ramps, high-visibility crosswalks, and traffic signal upgrade will provide much improved, safe, accessible, and user-friendly intersections, making things better. We also accepted $30,500 in grant funding from the Virginia Department of Social Services, which is to expand the county's kinship navigation program, and that provides services to families affected by substance use disorders. I believe, I'll just check with our attorney, I think these funds are continuing to come to us, and we have various times where we adopt and accept the money. Is that correct? Yep, you're on.
Oh, sorry. We have already adopted everything we need to accept the money, and so it's just coming in as the settlement.
Okay, that's great. Continuing to come in, that's great. And this helps with costs associated with mental health and substance use training for staff and families, and it pilots, and we're going to be piloting an online parenting program. There's community outreach and wellness events, promotional materials, and we have some real support for kin caregivers, and also some transportation support for people struggling with opioid addiction. Finally, we also authorized 2 future public hearings, and that one was a part of our commercial resiliency project, and that expands, that we adopted this item that we're advertising it, to expand self-service storage use category and introduces live-work units as an allowable use in commercial office and mixed-use buildings. And this particular, this just, again, adds more flexibility in our ability to respond to the market. This amendment will be heard by the Planning Commission no earlier than September 4, and the County Board no earlier than our September 14 meeting. Both uses offer opportunities for office and residential conversion, which is an interim or public alternative to tearing down these buildings, and it can be both less expensive and more climate friendly. Item 33, this amends the key development site plan conditions. This will be heard by the county board no earlier than June 15. And this item would revise the site plan conditions to transfer the use of event space up to 4 times per year for public access on the 8th floor of the conference facility at the Key to the 37th floor ballroom, which has unobstructed views of the region to the north, east, and west. And that's going to be a great amenity for us to have access to. To balance this conversion of public access, the item will reconfigure monetary contributions and also allocate more for the Roslyn Gateway Park, which we're really pleased about. Finally, we authorized the allocation of $280,400 in FY24 from the Affordable Housing Investment Fund to establish the 1501 Arlington Boulevard Apartments Tenant Assistance Fund for eligible residents residing at the 14-unit Williamsburg Apartments. I don't know if anybody's still here that was concerned about eviction, but this is part of what we do. In 2017, we approved a tenant assistance fund policy to help prevent the permanent displacement of low-income rental households when the county is taking action to build or preserve affordable housing. And this policy applies to the Williamsburg Apartments because they will be demolished to allow the construction of a new multifamily building, which will include 22 committed affordable units. And the Tenant Assistance Fund will help current tenants relocate during the construction period so that they can afford higher rents off-site, and then they'll be able to return to the committed affordable units at the property when they are all ready. I think that brings us to our regular agenda. And Mr. Kushner, if you would please call the first regular agenda item.
Yes, of course. One moment, please.
And Mr. Manager, I think I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, of course. Item number 37 is a request to advertise a public hearing to consider adoption of the proposed 2024 Arlington County Solid Waste Management Plan / Zero Waste Plan.
Thank you. Madam Chair, with me this morning is Doug Kreidemeyer, who's going to make the presentation, and also Eric Grabowski is available for other questions. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Doug.
Great. Go ahead. Good morning. You're on. Yes, the light's on. You're good.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here and to share this plan with the county board and the public. So the new solid waste management plan / zero waste plan has been in development for just over 2 years, and we have been guided by the Solid Waste Committee. They advised staff and the consultant as we went through the development period for this plan. And here are some of the key milestones that we've hit. We kicked off in February of 2022, and throughout the past 2 years have engaged the community at multiple opportunities. And we now have a draft that we are ready to bring before the board for adoption. So the purpose of the plan really is to meet 2 requirements. First, it's to meet the state requirements for solid waste management planning that Virginia DEQ requires of all jurisdictions, making sure that they have planned accordingly to meet the disposal needs of their communities, as well as adopting or making sure that they have adopted a minimum of a 25% recycling rate. And then the second piece is to fulfill the county board's 2015 zero waste resolution, which set the goal of diverting 90% of the county's waste generated away from landfilling or incineration by 2038. So the plan is set up to meet these 2 needs, and there's a set of recommended goals. The first set of goals are the mandatory goals, or those that are there in order to make sure that we meet the state requirements, and those are listed here in red. And then the second is really to go above and beyond and pursue the board's 90% diversion goal. And throughout the plan, there are several initiatives that I'll cover that really meet this aspect of that. So the plan proposes within those voluntary goals 15 voluntary enhancements or program initiatives, 4 policy programs, and 3 intermediate diversion targets to gauge progress towards that goal over the planning period. 60% in 2028, 75% in 2033, and 90% by 2038. Staff, along with a consultant and the Solid Waste Advisory Committee, evaluated all of the proposed initiatives looking at the overall impact to the diversion rate or the county's overall recycling rate, its impact in how we manage those on greenhouse gas emissions, and then third, the financial impact to the county. Those were then divided up into short, medium, and long-term goals. And there are 7 initiatives that are proposed for the short term within the plan, with all the other initiatives falling into the medium or long term. So when we look at how the proposed initiatives get us to that 90% diversion goal, this is a great example of how each of those contribute. There are a few that had a 0% contribution to the overall goal, but are still instrumental in fostering a sustainable and zero waste community and making sure that that is visible to the public. So over the past 2 years, like I've said, we've engaged the community at multiple times and multiple events. Most recently was our public comment on the draft plan in November of this past year. What we saw from feedback indicated compromise across the community, where resident feedback fell across the spectrum of the county in this plan not doing enough to pursue waste diversion and waste reduction, to it being a very low priority to opposition to us changing the current system. And so the impact and outcome of that public feedback warranted no significant changes. However, we did make minor edits for clarity and to further articulate some of the initiatives within the plan, or to kind of expand on where there may have been questions within the plan. And so after that public engagement period, we re-engaged the Solid Waste Committee, making them aware of the edits and changes. And now we are moving forward, and that is why we bring the request to advertise to the committee at this meeting. And that is the end of the presentation.
Thank you very much. And I believe we have Ms. McIntyre from our C2E2 Commission. Ms. McIntyre.
Good morning. I'm Joan McIntyre, speaking on behalf of the Climate Change, Energy, and Environment Commission. We really appreciate the comprehensive effort that went into developing these plans, and we also recognize that the county is is under some, regulatory obligations by the state in terms of how they have to structure at least certain portions of this plan, as well as limitations in terms of their authority in terms of implementing some solutions. Nevertheless, we really are disappointed that the plan essentially doesn't acknowledge the climate impact of our waste streams and address it, and doesn't really focus on waste reduction. And in fact, the targets are only minimally changed, and that really misses a lost opportunity. I mean, essentially, if you're not recognizing a problem, you can't have us develop the solution. So nationally, we know that, nationally, the climate impact of waste reduction is pretty significant, with plastics and food waste are particularly problematic in those efforts. And therefore, solutions are going to have to be across the board, federal, state, and even global levels to address it. But there are lots of opportunities that the local community in Arlington could be doing in doing that. And particularly, it's really rethinking the whole linear process of waste stream going from produce, consume, and then dispose to something that's much more circular with much more focus on reduce and reuse and repair and those strategies, and then recycle, and very, very little that would actually go into a waste stream. So, we did, you have our letter, we have fairly detailed information, but I'll just highlight some of the key recommendations. First is shift some of the public education. I mean, public education is a critical part of this issue, but it should be focused primarily on waste reduction as opposed to more of the emphasis here is on recycling right. And also to expand public engagement from just social media campaigns to actually a lot more direct engagement with stakeholders to, kind of develop and encourage strategies that really meet the county's goals. Arlington County really should be leading by example. There could be probably, make sure that we're emphasizing and having policies that the county itself is trying to shift much more to a reduce and reuse strategies in terms of their own waste management. This should and actually should include Arlington Public Schools, which by and large in this plant is pretty much given a pass. Lots of opportunities there. We all know what goes on in school cafeterias. And then construction and demolition debris is something that, again, is not tracked. Again, the county has limited authority, but still it would be very useful if this would emphasize better tracking of what happens to this debris and then working to develop incentives that would encourage reduction and reuse and recycling rather than moving into the landfills. And then finally is developing a more ambitious strategy addressing the poor performance of waste management, particularly recycling in multifamily units. That's something that we all know is very problematic. So, kind of looking at ways of much more improving and enhancing that. Again, comprehensive action to address climate change is not possible without actually recognizing the climate impact of our waste streams and identifying solutions that would move towards a more circular approach to reduce, reuse, and recycle. And it really has to be in that order. And Arlington can and should do better in terms of its policies in this plan and other climate policies that we have going forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McIntyre. Do we have any public speakers, Mr. Kushner?
We do not.
We do not. All right, the conversation is now with the board. This, of course, is an advertisement. It's going to come back to us next month and get a lot of, I think, scrutiny over that time. Any questions for staff at the moment, colleagues? And maybe we'll start with a motion. Do you want to start with a motion, Mr. DiFerranti?
Sure, happy to.
That'd be great.
I will move that we authorize advertisement of a public hearing on June 15th, 2024 to consider adoption of the 2024 Arlington County Solid Waste Management Plan. The plan, if adopted, would replace the county's 2004 Solid Waste Management Plan.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion's been moved and seconded. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Sure, I'll speak briefly.
Ask questions, too.
I might be able to segue into a question. This is required by state code, and there's been immense amount of work from the committee, immense amount of public meetings and engagement in order to bring us to this point. Of course, we're way above the 25% in state law, and generally we all support complying with the law and are thrilled that we're doubling the law in some ways. So for me, engaged with advocates some on this, and it was helpful for me to understand more or less, and so this is the first question for staff, is the first 5 of the plan, the first 5 or actually 6 sections of the code, of the plan, are really mostly focused on complying with state law. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, that's correct. So Section 7 within the plan is really the only aspect of it that is the zero waste plan aspect, and all other sections are there to meet the state requirements.
Great. Thank you. That helps clarify, because we did get some comments that some of the language in the other sections wasn't as forward-leaning as we might want. And it's inherently a challenge because we have to fully meet state law, and then we have to work to lead, as Ms. McIntyre sort of described. So the second question that I have is, just looking through Section 7 and looking through the Appendix F, I want to think about how we create the presumptions, some of the pressure without binding future boards to follow through on the funding pieces of this. And so I guess first, am I remembering correctly, we did put the 2 additional employees in this past budget. Is that correct? Or no? I could be incorrect. We were not able to do that because of our budget pressures. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Mindful that there are many, many things that we would like to do that we're not able to do. We'll have the work sessions. This may be a challenge and perhaps impossible or imponderable, but either for the manager or for the 2 of you who lead our work, is there a way to, remind us or sort of push us such that we would be forced to grapple with this funding thing every time we get there? Because having a plan that aspires to get us to 90% without us doing the work and funding the work is not going to get us there. And so I don't know if you guys have, if any of the 3 of you have any thoughts on that. Without binding, but also, every work session we should be talking about it.
I think part of the issue with, as opportunities come up, with closeout monies or other things, opportunities like that, I think we would come forward and say, here are some opportunities. Again, when we talk about waste reduction and encouraging additional recycling efforts, I think the reality is these are a lot of educational, like one-time monies. So as those monies are available, I think we'd bring those requests forward to the board.
Great, that's super helpful. And I think implicit in that is shouldn't be dreaming about ongoing money and committing ongoing money without having that ongoing money to commit. So I'm mindful I have one additional question.
Why don't you go for it?
Okay, so the additional question is, okay, the additional question is a little related to Ms. McIntyre's point. There is in Appendix F reference to climate impacts of solid waste. I would fess up to not being as deeply imbued and educated on those issues. And I don't know if staff has suggestions for how to get better educated, thoughts. It is plausible that in the month between now and June, I might, we have an older resolution, which seems substantively fairly fine, but the world has changed. Thoughts on how we might get more climate aware of the interplay of those, and perhaps just signaling that either on the resolution or on the Chapter 7 or Appendix F, I might have some interest, not in rewriting the whole thing, but in adding to the policy there. And so really it's a climate question for either or both of you.
I think this is just a fundamental understanding issue and just some data in the background. About 40% of the food that's generated in this country is wasted. And that is on the production side. It's the water, it's the land, it's the energy to create crops that go bad because we just don't consume it on the consumer side. And then there's what is the consumer actually wastes at home. So you may have noticed, I think starting yesterday, on a lot of the red top cabs on the e-boards, we have started an Avoid Food Waste campaign with tips about using a shopping list, eating your leftovers, those kinds of things. So really it is, and then it kind of directs people, if they go on our website, to look about, food lost or waste. It talks about some of those impacts of how food is really consequential from a greenhouse gas generation and just a resource drain perspective. So we're making the linkages as people are aware of various items. You do see comprehensive organics management as one of those things that we want to do, which is really directly managing the food scrap side. But at the same time, we need to educate people about the whole consumption side and the what they call the food loss side, which is really on the production side. So I think through just making people more aware, tying it with the websites where we can have more comprehensive information, tying it to the EPA website, the USDA Department of Agriculture website, where a lot of this information resides. It's hard to hold people's attention for these messages unless they're really interested, and that's been our challenge about behavior change, making sure people use the systems that are available. Arlington has one of the most comprehensive solid waste management systems in the region, and it really is whether people take advantage of those systems or not. And that's just the real challenge. So we try to educate. Again, we can always use more dollars to educate further and make it more aware. We're trying to figure out social media relative to direct advertisement relative to other things that we have done and do. So we're trying to be as clever and creative we can as to get the information out. But again, this is just a challenge when you have a whole people with a whole bunch of requirements and time is limited. And so to say how much time of your day are you going to focus on your solid waste management, even though that we know garbage touches everybody every single day, we have to deal with it. And so we try to make it as convenient and understandable for people, and we just need to do better.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah,
Madam
thank
Chair.
you. Sure. Ms. Coffey.
Yeah, thank you. You know, this is one of the many glamorous parts of local government that I was so excited to work on. But, you know, I think we spent a lot of time talking about the differences between single-family residential waste management and multi-unit building waste management. And I think a couple of the comments, more so than questions, that, you know, I would like to make, and this is an RTA, so we're going to have plenty of more discussion, is just that it's really hard for our multi-unit buildings to get the proper information. I think there are requirements of our buildings that even as a resident of them, I didn't know, because I don't think they're fully complied with. And so I think that there's a lot of work to do on making sure we get into the buildings, working with CAPE, working with you know, like the true on the ground organizing, right? Like not just social media, but how do we get into the buildings and make sure people have the right information? Because I genuinely think that the culture of our county is people want to do this, people want to help, but when you add, you know, one thing on top of another, and it's first it's a 10-minute inconvenience, then it's another 20-minute inconvenience, it's really hard to keep staying dedicated. And I think that's one thing that, you know, I would like to see reflected in this plan, right? Is like, it's the education aspect is really important, but it's also how do we create a system where this is just easily part of the day-to-day life. And I think the on-street composting is a really good place to start for multi-unit buildings, but I also think that starting to work with, I see we have a planning commissioner here, with the planning commission, to have this as a consideration in our site plan designs, that like, where is composting gonna go? Even if we're not doing it right now, 20 years in the future, where is it going to go in these buildings? And we know that, because we know that food waste is going to continue. We know, you know, the memes and the jokes of I buy a bag of spinach every week just to throw it away at the end of the week. You know, we all do it. It's really hard. Our consumption habits are not great. And so figuring out how do we work it in to make it as easy as possible so that it really is kind of an opt-out culture rather than an opt-in culture. And I think, you know, education is part of that, because I think we do offer a lot more than what people are aware of. But I also think, especially for our folks in multi-unit buildings, some of the services are really weak, and it really asks you as an individual to do a lot of proactive choosing to do it, rather than, oh, it's equally as easy to toss everything in the trash as it is to make sure it gets to the right place.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Cunningham.
I am looking forward to all of the additional feedback over the next month. And I just wanted to elevate a couple of things I've heard so far. I'm sure you guys have heard pieces of it as well. But number one is around construction waste, that the plan doesn't highlight the issue of construction waste, which is, I think, over more than the majority of the municipal waste stream. Normally, we are blessed to be having lots of development and probably going to have some demolition coming along with that. So I want to make sure that that is part of our consideration and incentives. Secondly, I think we have lumped government and schools in with all commercial, and I'd like us to push harder to elevate that, to pull it out so that we can reinforce leading by example, and also highlight on the school side where other jurisdictions are really leading, so that we might make sure that we are one of those, if not the top one. And then finally, we heard earlier about diversion efforts, and I think Arlington's had a lot of citizen involvement with diversion efforts. The Bikes for the World folks spoke earlier, but really thinking about how can we get back to pulling all those partners together in addition to the wonderful professional staff that we have as well. So look forward to working with you over the next month, and thank you for the great work here.
Thank you. Mr. Karantonis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So first of all, thank you. This is a lot of work and good work, and actually it stimulates a lot of thinking. I remember I had a professor many years ago who was saying, future archaeologists, what they will do, they will have an easy job. They will go to their landfills and they will find out what we were about. So that's, and say that, another anecdote, and that shows a little bit how I am approaching this conversation. So last week, I was literally approached on the street in my neighborhood by a neighbor who, is my neighbor, and he said, have you seen, thank you for doing the right thing. He was observing how Arlington County was demolishing the old SunTrust building on Columbia Pike. And he said, I appreciate so much that you took the time to take down the windows, deconstruct, save stuff, etc. The other building, and that was the Fenwick building that APS has demolished a few months ago, everything was just lumped in and was carried away. And this is a neighbor who is a complete civilian. He doesn't know about construction. He's not a usual, critic, etc. But that shows you literally where we need to do a better job. I think that I was really impressed by that, and actually structures my thinking about the construction waste and debris paragraph, section down in page 30 or 20 something. So on this, the second thing that there are a couple of things that I miss in the whole message of the plan, in the part that is not really the compliance part, the first part, which is the aspirational part. And I think Ms. McIntyre made that very clear, the reduce part. Normally everybody in environmental conversation starts with 3 R's, reduce, reuse, and recycle. And conveniently, we mostly forget the first R. And reducing is not only an incentive game, it is also a regulatory and a process and a flow game. If we want to really get on multifamily, their biggest problem is how to manage the sheer bulk of waste. Therefore, we must find where their interest is triggered in reducing that waste in the first place. And I live in a multifamily too. It is not a vertical one, but we had a really big problem because it was really expensive to accommodate very high recycling volumes, and we needed more toters, and all this costs money. So I found out that once it's very clear how much it costs, and it is really individualized, as in, I was in Japan and they showed me how they actually measure block by block how much the waste weighs, and they pay accordingly. So there are many ways to do that, and is technology and the ability of tracking all this in real time, or nearly real time, is for me also an additional aspirational goal as we go forward. This is a 20-year plan, so we should be able to talk about that. Finally, on the education piece, I really think that this linkage between greenhouse emissions, which are staggering. This is one of the biggest, after transportation and construction, one of the biggest emissions sources. at all. We talk about several gigatons of CO2. I would like to find a way to include in our plan the aspirational part to actually account for these emissions and make sure that we can model them. It doesn't have to be tomorrow, but we need to be able to measure the biggest bang for the buck when we do policy. And there are so many individual proposals here. To be able to actually measure them based on outcomes. And that for me is extremely important. I will try to work on this, on language for this in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you. So I had a question. I was surprised to see that some people oppose doing more with waste reduction. Could you, I clearly need to read the comments, but if you could summarize a little bit, I kind of locked, I said, what? So why do people not like, what's the opposition?
So it was a mix of comments and opinions on it. I think the biggest one is that people view us like the plan is asking them to do more in managing their waste. And as it was mentioned, people have limits on their time, and asking them to do anything more or above than what they're currently doing eats into that. And so I think they view that as a challenge as we, move forward. But also on us, we are trying to make things as convenient as possible. And so as we move forward and implement things, we're hopefully making it as convenient for people to participate as possible.
All right, that makes sense. A couple of things. And listening to the discussion, I realize in a way, and maybe it is done here, I really have not had time to look at this closely. I'm looking forward to looking at it. And actually, in part, Ms. Coffey, so you're probably joking that this is something you were looking for. I actually, over time, have found this fascinating. That's when you start to...
I was mostly serious.
Yeah, it knows when you maybe really been doing this, but it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. Maybe we do this, divide it, because I realize that when you're looking at it, we've got the government, us, which we can control a fair amount. We've got schools, which maybe we can lean on and work with a lot, and there's a lot that goes there. You got commercial, and there are real limits to what we can do with that, and then there are private homes, and that's the whole education effort. So it's kind of 4 separate sectors. There might be one I'm missing, but that kind of seems like, and they all probably need different approaches. So that's something to think about. And on the public education, which we've talked about a lot, I'm hoping that C2E2 will help us with that, because that's really something the commissions can really help us with, reaching out to homeowners. The whole thing about making it part of everyday life, I don't know, was that what you said, Ms. Coffey? I think it was, yeah. That's totally it. So I'm going to go all baby boomer on you just very briefly. So when I started out, I and a lot of my friends were more stay-at-home moms. There wasn't working, it was hard. And we didn't have a lot of money. So we didn't have a lot of money to buy food. So throwing out food was something that was like, and I'd come from Africa, I'd lived in Central Africa. I mean, nothing was wasted. And I'm the grandchild of the Depression. So my whole focus as a young mom was saving, not throwing food out. I mean, every time, I felt like a failure when I threw out food. Flash forward, and there's a lot more food, people got a lot of money, and I watch the younger generation, some of them I'm related to, and I get pretty upset. And in fact, in my retirement, one of my, this is really strange, I know, one of the things I want to do is actually do more with leftovers and try to prevent so much tossing out of food, because it just drives me crazy. But then I look at what people are trying, and it used to fall on women, let's face it, it was women that did this. This is really for women. They're trying to raise kids, and now they're trying to have a job. And I suddenly realized, how can you ask these young women who are trying to raise families, keep things going, have a career, do it all, to then also worry about leftovers and what they're going to do? It's really hard. So we do have to figure out ways to make it easy, I think. If, depending on how things go, food gets more and more expensive, then it'll be automatic that people will not throw it out. But it's really interesting to me how this kind of goes in cycles and is generational. So how we can make it so that everybody's horrified when they throw out food, I'm not sure how to do that. It's probably not really within our purview exactly, but we might think about it. So I've kind of talked on and on, but this is fascinating to me on how it goes. One last story. I used to, in Africa, I was teaching, and we would have, so pencils and books were like, people didn't have anything. I mean, it was just little scraps of paper that kids would have. And I would grade the papers, and it was a big, and then I'd get peanuts at the market and come back wrapped in little paper cones. It was the paper I just graded, is what the peanuts were wrapped in. You know, everything was used over and over and over again. So anyway, it was hard for me to come back. That was part of my cultural shock when I came back. All right, enough. I've gone on enough on a rainy day. Really good work. Thank you. Fascinating. I'm looking forward to the briefings and working on it more. And changing behavior is probably one of the toughest things that we can do as a species. It's really hard. But that's probably what we need to do here. So I'm looking forward to the discussion and seeing how we go. All right. I think we have a motion before us. It was seconded. What is it? Seconded? It was seconded. I think we're ready to vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. All right. Thank you all very much. And Mr. Kushner, I believe that is the last item for today.
No further items.
All right. Thank you, everybody. The board is now in recess until Tuesday, May 21st, 2024 at 3 p.m. right here. Thank you all. Have a good weekend.